Welcome back. Welcome back to I Didn't Read Your Book. I am your host, Lutch, and we are back with another fun episode. Today, we are going to be talking about So Much Fire and So Many Plans by Aaron S Gallagher. So let's get right into reading the back of the book. Christoph Ossirian, the greatest painter of a generation, is dead. Carolyn Delgado, his muse, his partner, his lover, is left to carry on without him. Brent Mediera, with these names, people, I'm terrible at reading names. Brent, a reporter, is looking for answers and understanding. From the past through present, Brent will follow Carolyn as she leads him from the beginning of the story to the end, hoping that she can illuminate the mysterious genius behind some of the most famous works of art in the world. From the stark cityscapes of Chicago and New York to the lush jungles of Sao Paulo, Brazil, Carolyn leads Brent on a journey through the history of Ossirian and herself, and shows him the hidden cost of being both artist and muse. And then we have got our title here. Again, hopefully by the time I actually release these, this will become redundant because I'll be able to put it on screen, but work with me. I mean, it's very aesthetically pleasing, you know, that I would pick that up if I would think it's, you know, about the arts, the painting, the specific art itself. I don't know that I would see this as, no, I guess the title is pretty, you know, I wouldn't expect any kind of nonfiction. I would assume that this is a story, but yeah, I'm very interested to see what, so we have the three, you know, we have Christoph, who's the dead painter, Carolyn, who's the muse telling her story. I guess she's the protagonist or narrator or whatever. And Brent is the reporter looking for the answers and understanding. So depending on, I mean, I don't know what else much there is to say. I guess we'll let Aaron do the talking. So let's bring him in. And there is Aaron S Gallagher. Hello and welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh, very, very pleased to have you. So just real quick, we will be referring to Aaron as she and her if it comes up. She is just beginning her journey of transition, and we are here to support that. The book already has the name Aaron that she previously had, so she's going to keep with that. So when you're looking for it, I believe you said you're going to continue with in terms of writing, keeping the same name, right?
I published all of my first books under that name, so I figured I would just keep it as a pen name.
Okay, so just to, if anybody's confused, that's what's going on. So we have our story here with Christoph, Carolyn, and Brent. So my first question is just about the structure of this. There's a movie that I'm thinking of. It's eluding me now, but it's basically, it sounds similar to this type of thing where there's someone close to you know, an artist who has passed, and now there is a reporter or a writer trying to you know, get information on that. So I guess my question is how is this structured in you know, as we're coming in, what kind of story can we expect to be told?
It is primarily an exploration of art and artists, very specifically focusing on what the people around the artist go through while the artist is busy creating their art. I wrote a book a couple of years ago that explored what happens when an artist gets their fondest wish. They get to be their dream, basically. This book explores what happens to the people around them when that happens.
And so, obviously, without giving away too much, what would that look like? As I guess I would consider myself an artist in some ways. I definitely haven't made that like a living. So I don't know that I could relate to it in that way. So yeah, what exactly what does that come with?
It comes with a lot of damage, I think.
Mm.
When
How
you
so?
are when you are focused completely on one aspect of your life, all the others will suffer.
Mm.
And in this particular instance, the artist doesn't care about the rest of his life. All he is focused on is creating that art. Everyone
Mm.
else in his life, on the other hand, has a more multifaceted personality, and their lives suffer for his art.
Gotcha. And so do we get to meet Christoph, or does the story start off with him already gone?
The story starts off with him already having died in a car accident, and Brent encounters Carolyn in New York City about a
Okay.
week after his death
Oh, okay.
and convinces her to tell him what Christoph was actually like. So most of the book is actually told in flashbacks with
Okay.
interspersed present
And so
scenes.
is she narrating, or is she more of a protagonist and you're narrating? Or there is
Insofar as the technical aspect, I tend to write in very third person limited. So there isn't one overarching narrative voice. I prefer to let the characters do what they do.
can you define that term, third person? What was it?
Limited. The
Sorry,
various
what do you got?
the third person limited view. The various tenses you can write in. First person is I did this, I did that. Second person is you do this, you do that. Third person is the one we're most familiar with. They did this, they did that.
And what's
Third,
what's the limit? How does the limited part play into it?
well, depending on how you write the book, the narrator either knows everything that's happening and everything that goes on in everybody's brain, which would be third unlimited. Third limited focuses only on one character as the point of view. And
Gotcha.
while you
Gotcha.
get their inner thoughts, all of the other characters, all you see are their actions.
Gotcha. So you can, so as a reader, you can follow Carolyn's thoughts,
Yes,
but outside of that, we're not privy to that outside of the actual text of the story.
absolutely.
Cool. That sounds very interesting. And so again, I want to pull as much out as I can without any spoilers. The geography is a big part of the back of the book. So I just want to ask you about, is it places that have been visited where Christoph is revered? Is it the subject of the art? How exactly does the Sao Paulo and all that play into the story?
I think it's interesting to see how a place shapes a person. And I thought it would be more interesting to take a person whose natural expression is creative art and put them in a place that they connect with more than where they're from. Christoph is actually from Wisconsin.
Okay.
And he made his way to Sao Paulo because he felt a draw to that. He wanted to see what that looked like. So it was interesting to explore Sao Paulo from his point of view, where everything was new and unique and fresh and beautiful. And I think that played a lot on his character. Carolyn, of course, is from Ecuador, actually, but lives in Sao Paulo. She's going to school there. And Brent is from Chicago.
And so is it they was Christoph and Carolyn were traveling around a lot during while he was creating his art? Is that?
Yes. They
Gotcha.
started in Sao Paulo, but as he became more and more famous in the book, they got to basically world travel and go where their hearts told them to and explore the world together and separately.
Interesting. So obviously, if we want to know the details of the story, we want to get the book and read it for ourselves. But just speaking more generally, what if if you could have one, if you could boil it down to one or two sentences, what would you hope that a reader would take away from this story?
That love is probably more important than art.
Love is more important than art. I wonder, I feel like that's a message that a lot of people would already agree with, though, don't you think?
Well, it gets a little fuzzier when you get into the idea of being in love with one person, or being in love with one person who's not necessarily good for you.
Hmm.
Loving yourself enough to let them go is just as important as what you do. And that's actually one of Carolyn's flaws. She can't decipher that gap between her and Christoph. So although the reader might feel like she probably should move away, she can't.
So it's it mentions artist and muse. So I'm wondering about the relationship that Christoph and Carolyn had, outside of the actual the traveling and creating these works. What of that relationship made her a muse?
She inspired him. She was the first person in Sao Paulo that actually inspired him, and she remains throughout the book his primary inspiration for what he does. But the problem is he almost sees her as kind of a divine influence. So there's sort of a disconnect between his connection with her as his muse and his connection with her as his love. And because he is so focused on just what he does, he doesn't always bridge that connection. He, like we all are, he's flawed, and he doesn't always act appropriately.
Gotcha. That's
And
very interesting.
Carolyn, of course, is in love with him and doesn't stop him from acting inappropriately, doesn't protect herself. And that's one of the things that I was trying to get across in the book.
Yeah, I guess that is where it gets muddy, and about whether it's love versus art. And so maybe more generally, would you say it could apply to, if someone who's not an artist, that love is more important than just work, or a singular any singular focus? Would you agree, or is that not really?
I would agree on the face of it. I think that it's important to know the limit of how much you should devote yourself to something. It's
So,
knowing when to walk away is kind of important in a relationship that's not going well. Knowing
right,
when go ahead.
Well, and that's exactly where I was going, because that begs the question about, loving love and loving a person, and in this case, art is almost the same type of emotion, is that you love the art and you love the person, and either one of them can be beneficial in the right context, and either one can be toxic in the right context. So I guess, just like most things in life, it's about finding that balance.
Absolutely. And that's one of his primary problems, is he's completely unbalanced as a person.
Yes. And so, I mean, I will, I would, what I like about this is, the fact that this doesn't, seem like, it seems like a pretty, I don't want to say straightforward, but the concept is not, out there. And the message is seemingly very clear. And so I guess that because of these stories, it really hinges upon your resonating with the characters, or rather the characters resonating with you.
I do my very best every time I write to create characters that are not only believable, but are empathetic in some way or another. I have written very sympathetic characters that everybody is supposed to connect with, but I really enjoy writing very antagonistic characters. Jerks, basically, that no one would want to connect with, but for some reason have this draw. My first book, I wrote just an absolute jerk, who thought he was the end all be all of one particular thing. It was an urban fantasy. And he thought that he was simply the greatest magician in the world. And unfortunately, it turned out that he was absolutely right. So it sort of justified his behavior. But again, he learned that lesson toward the end of that book, that maybe not as much as you might think. I like writing characters who seem on the face of them to be completely indefensible and then bring you around to the point where, all right, I can see that.
I like that. I like that. And what I'm finding through this podcast is that I had a couple nonfiction writers on, and those conversations tend to be because the podcast is I didn't read the book. When it comes to fiction, there's a lot about knowing the details of the story that obviously if you haven't read the book, then you're not going to get. So we're not so much dancing around, but the conversation goes in different ways. But the in my own and again, to the listeners have heard me say this a million times, but when I was a kid, I used to love reading fiction, and just all day, every day. I would love reading. And then I went to school, and they would assign, a million pages of this boring book. And then I just got, all the way through college. And then now everything is podcasts and YouTube videos. And I watch my stuff at two times speed, and it's all going. So I just can't sit and read a fiction book, because I'm just sitting here like, okay, what's the point here? What's the point here? But I'm so in love with movies and TV, and you would expect somebody who has that mindset to be, again, driven to more plot driven type shows. But as much as I love an amazing plot, don't get me wrong, it's really those character driven shows where what the plot needs to be good. It needs to be well written, but the point of the show comes out in the way the characters behave and what happens to them and how they react and that kind of stuff. And so I'm curious how you as a fiction writer take on that task that doesn't happen in nonfiction, because you're just writing about what's already real. How do you create these? What is your process to create a character out of thin air?
I think it changes every time. I write a different book, I come up with a different character. All of my books start with a character. It's usually the primary character, but it doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's a secondary character. This one started with Carolyn, because I was wondering what would happen if you made somebody the entire focus of your life and then they suddenly died. What is that void like? And that's how Carolyn grew. And that's why in the opening scene of the book, when she first encounters Brent, she is very caustic. She is aloof and very reserved, because she is hurting so bad, she pushes everything away. That's how I started with it. And of course, if you start with someone who has just lost somebody, you need to then figure out who they just lost, what they do, and everything sort of branches organically from there. It does get a little odd when you're writing, because a lot of times the choices you make, you don't have any idea why. I had no idea why this book needed to be set in Brazil, but for some reason, that's the only place it would fit.
And how do you come to that conclusion? How does that?
That's the part of writing that is sort of unexplainable. It's like trying to figure out why Die Hard needed to be set in California. It would have worked in other places, but for some reason, Nakatomi Plaza in California, that was the place for Die Hard. And you can't imagine it like in Jersey or downtown Topeka. I think what I was trying to do was show not just the gap between them as far as their emotional state, but culture shock. You got an American kid in 1950 in Brazil with a native, And will they mesh? Will they find areas that they have in common? Will they, rub up against one another? That kind of conflict is interesting to me. I don't think plot is the primary focus of my books. I don't think my books are something that happen to characters. I think that my characters are people that something happens to, which is a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because that's the kind of thing that where, hey, make it into a movie, it'll be my favorite thing. If I sit down and I'm just like, okay, what's going on here? And I don't know, maybe you have some insight into how there is, because it's, and I mean, when I say I love movies and TV, like I get into it. I'm obsessed with the shows that I like. I'm very elitist with the shows I'll watch. I mean, if it's not Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones, it's not good and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know. I can't. I think it has. I think it does have to do with the changing of the attention economy, so to speak, and just being able to pay attention to things. And I've tried to transition more to instead of listening to podcasts all the time, which can be great, but some of them I'm just they're just comedy podcasts, or I'm a big UFC fan, so it's a UFC podcast. And I drive a lot for work, so instead of listening to music, I'll be listening to those. And that's time that I could be using to listen to audiobooks. And I'm 31 now, and I'm just maybe in the past couple of years have I been like a real grown up, where I graduated college in 2012. But I was just doing like serving tables, working odd jobs here, and I didn't really have a path. And thankfully now I am a dog trainer, so I'm doing that full time, and hopefully this will blow up. But I don't even know how I got there. Sorry. But yeah, it's just things are always happening so fast. I think the level of storytelling that's happening on TV and in movies has risen to such a level that you can get that literary value out of these mediums.
Oh,
Not
absolutely.
everything, of course, but
yeah. I personally think that one of the things that is more of a draw to a visual art is it's really hard to write subtle emotional body cues. And it's much easier to see people upset or frown or their eye twitch than it is to write it convincingly.
That makes a lot of sense.
So much detail. So it's easier to emotionally connect with someone you can see. I read the first book of Game of Thrones halfway through like a dozen times. I just could not get into it. I hated it. I did not like it at all. Then the series came out, and I watched the first episode.
So sorry to interrupt you. Just to give you a frame of reference, I've seen the show about 5-6 times, but never read the books. I've decided, unless I know that there is going to be an ending and those books are coming out before George dies, then I'm not reading them. But sorry, continue.
I respect that point of view immensely. Anyway, I tried a half a dozen times to get through the book and I couldn't, but I watched the first episode of the first season. And then I went back and read the book, and all of a sudden I had a face, I had facial features, I had emotional reactions. It was much easier for me to read the book having seen those characters. So I think the visual medium gives you a more direct anchor than reading does.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that definitely is the case. And thinking about it now, it's I think, if you read fiction a lot, you probably have that muscle in your mind to flex and imagine things better than someone like me who's just sitting in front of a screen and getting it blasted to my eyeballs. And I definitely would concede that I'm sure that if I had the patience to sit and read all of the Game of Thrones books, that I probably would get more enjoyment out of the story itself than the story of the TV show, especially with the ending. But not even counting how bad that was. The show was really good. But that being said, if you have that muscle to flex, where you can be reading, you know, how long it takes to describe a scene, and be able to picture that, and as more things are being added, you know, that mental picture is updated. Maybe I think, you know, like what you're saying, the visual aspect, because I have atrophied that muscle of imagination. I guess I just can't. It just goes from, you know, one description to the next, and I'm just not really creating that story in my mind. Which, now that I'm saying it out loud, seems like a pretty obvious, you know, necessary point of enjoying a novel.
Yes. It is, I will say, a skill. It is something that you can develop, you should develop. I am a little biased being a writer and having gotten my degrees in English, but it is, especially having gotten my degrees in English, you are forced to read a lot of stuff you probably normally wouldn't. A lot of stuff you really enjoy, but a lot of stuff you have to get through. And you have to know it well enough to be able to make points and debate characters and scenes and morality, et cetera, et cetera. So it is something that you can learn. I personally am biased. I think that reading is far superior, but I also like a movie with a slow burn where you don't even find out the plot halfway through. You know, you've got all these little pieces that come together. I'm a stickler for details. So I really like building up to, rather than, and then the building exploded, you know, chapter 1.
Definitely. And I mean, I would imagine again in that same vein that you probably have much more patience for a slow burn movie than I would. While I do absolutely appreciate that. Or again, just taking take a specific example. You've seen Breaking Bad?
Of course.
And,
I guess, of course, but yes.
And I wouldn't necessarily say that was a slow burn, and it started pretty hot. But in you know, comparing it to, you know, on a rewatch, you realize how slow the beginning is compared to the end. And you know, but that show, I was hooked from the beginning, even though it was slow. With Game of Thrones, I was always like, dragons and fantasy, that's not my thing. You know, I used to watch The Walking Dead, and that was good for the first 5 seasons, but then, you know, that was my exception. I'm not into that kind of stuff. And for years, everybody's like, no, I'm telling you, it's different. It's different. Check it out. And then, you know, don't admonish me, but I've never seen Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, and so I'm waiting for the opportunity where, because I realize I've missed the boat to just sit and watch it now, having seen, you know, all of the modern things that have been that stand on Star Wars and Lord of the Rings shoulders. But in hindsight, it looks like, you know, because I've seen the other ones first, it's not as impressive. And but I definitely do want to sit down with somebody who knows a lot about the lore of the two, either franchise. But yeah, when you know, it was around maybe season 6-ish of Game of Thrones, and still it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I start to recognize that. Still have no interest. And so I just start watching it because I'm like, all right, I recognize what I missed by not seeing Star Wars. Like every other show has a Star Wars joke or a Star Wars parody or something. And you know, Lord of the Rings is supposed to be just you know, really good, and obviously is such a big influence on Game of Thrones. But when I started I started watching Game of Thrones just to watch it. I just wanted to watch it so that I could say, okay, I watched it, I've seen it, and I can make a real opinion. I'm not judging it based on anything else. And for at least the first 2 seasons, and maybe some of the beginning of the 3rd season as well, I was you know, I was online telling everybody, oh, you guys watch this crappy show, it's so slow, it's so boring. And then, you know, something near the end of the season, something would hit me. I'm like, all right, well, I'll keep going. But like, all right, can we get this moving? Can we get this? And so it wasn't really until like the middle of season 3 where I was like, okay, I'm in. Yep, I'm in. But yeah, so if it hadn't, in a vacuum, I probably wouldn't have. I would have probably watched the first few episodes and then just been like, "Ugh, this is boring. Nope, don't care." And the fact that I think is the most character driven project of anything on TV. And I would have just missed out.
I have opinions.
Please.
Personally, I think This Is Us is the single most character-driven piece of fiction that has graced the television screen.
I hate This Is Us.
Why?
I hate it. It's so cheesy, in my opinion. I want my old roommate and I, same kind of thing. It was getting big, it was getting popular, and I'm like, ABC or whatever time. I was like, they haven't really done much. And so my old roommate and co-host at the time, shout out Conover, we were like, all right, let's just watch it. Let's see what it is. And we went in, legitimately interested. And we saw the twist of the first episode, and we are like, okay, we've got something here. This could be cool. But then every episode, everything was so manufactured, and the music was so heavy, and it got to the point where by the second season, I think we just wanted to see what happened to Jack. But by the second season, he was my roommate was literally predicting the dialogue. And it was just like, we don't need to watch this. Like, we could, I get it. And so throw that back to you.
I think that it is visually stunning to see a cast of writers branch off the way they have with This Is Us and show not only the development of each of the main characters, but all of the decisions of the secondary characters and how they fractally branch to influence all of the lives around them. Mm-hmm. It's almost a visual representation of how interconnected we all actually are. We never realize the things that lead up to us, but everything that came before, even if it doesn't appear to be connected, at least in the show, has some influence on who they were at the start of that show. And in turn, as the show goes on, everything that we see influencing them can be seen in their behaviors and their choices as they move forward. Right. And I'm a big fan of it.
And let me clarify. I think that concept and the idea of, the way they tell the story with the flashbacks and stuff, I think that's really cool. That's what, kept me in for as long as I was, and I legitimately wanted to know what happened to Jack. Like, I can't front. I was like, tell me what happened to Jack. And that's his name, right?
Yes.
I think the actors did very well, but I'm surprised, and maybe I'm just projecting, but as a writer, it was the dialogue, it was the screenwriting itself, not the contents of what was happening to the characters and how the story was playing out that turned me off. And it was specifically, so like, even if everything was exactly the same, it didn't, I found myself saying like these, and it's a quote from a Family Guy episode, but like, these are not, these don't sound like conversations that real people have. This sounds like a show that's trying to move a plot. And so, like with the kids being young and how that affects them in as they get older, that's a great idea. That's that could be a great show. But I think the specifically the screenwriting, or I mean, I guess that's what you referred to as screenwriting, but the actual the words that they're saying, I think it just doesn't, it comes off so unnatural.
Dialogue is probably one of the most tricky parts of writing to get correct. And it works a lot better when you have a person writing it as opposed to a team of writers, because then you kind of run into this situation where all the dialogue sounds the same from all the characters. I call it Whedon syndrome, personally. I'm a big fan of Joss Whedon, but if you close your eyes and just read the lines of all the characters, they all sound like they have the same educational background. They use all the same slang. They have all the same action beats.
And remind me which movies, at least in the MCU, are him?
Avengers and Avengers 2.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he did those two, and the diabolically terrible DC movie. Anyway,
I haven't I haven't dove into the DCEU because that was another thing with the MCU. I was like, superhero movies, like, it's okay, superhero comes in, there's a bad guy, saves the day. What else is there? And I didn't understand, obviously, that it was a cinematic universe. And I was like, there another Iron Man? Like, what else could there be? And then, of course, luckily, I wish it was before Infinity War, but it was between Infinity War and Endgame, where, you know, obviously because of Infinity War, people had such strong reactions that I was like, I was like, all right, maybe, you know, this is another thing with Game of Thrones, where maybe this is something I don't want to miss out on. And oh man, am I a huge fan now. And again, it's because of how realistic the characters themselves are to themselves. I think they, you know, obviously we're dealing with, you know, magic and alternate universes and you know, scrolls and stuff like that. So I don't mean realistic as in true to life, but I mean who the characters are. They have a full they have depth, they have substance, and that carries through. And you could see, it's like, what would Thor do in this situation? And I don't know if you've checked out the What If series yet, but
yes,
phenomenal. Oh, it's so good.
I can't recommend it enough, especially since I found out it was actually Chadwick Boseman's last project. He did his own. He did T'Challa. I'm not going to miss it. Period. I don't care how bad it is.
Yeah.
But it turns out it's not bad. So yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, people were like, and even if all of the episodes weren't going to be canon, and even if they decide now that they're not canon, they're still awesome stories.
Yes.
And I love the idea, just the idea of it. But the fact that it is canon, there's a lot going on. And I feel like so many people, for whatever reason, are not taking it seriously. And like, it's way better. Like, you know, I liked WandaVision. You know, given with all the lockdown stuff and the phase 4 got rearranged, and Black Widow is supposed to be the first phase 4 release, which I think I would have been happy with, but again, between the two of them, they not the best, but I did really enjoy them both. Falcon the Winter Soldier was kind of all right, but I didn't love it, but I liked some of the political messages, so that gave it an extra couple points. And Loki and What If are just next level. I mean, the as of recording, the most recent episode was the Doctor Strange episode, and that if that episode was just stretched out and that was the movie Multiverse of Madness, I'd be happy. That story was so cool. It was so cool. And it's like, again, because these characters are written in such a way where you can ask what if, because the answer will be there in the same way you could ask, what would this real person do? If you don't have a character with that much substance, then when you ask what if, that it doesn't really go anywhere, because this person doesn't, you don't know enough about that person to answer the question. So I guess that is a good segue into, you know, I originally asked you about how you're developing characters, and so who are how many books have you written?
This most recent one is my 19th.
Oh wow, 19. That's a lot. So and I would assume that with 19 books, there's a whole laundry list of different characters, and so you said you start with one character and then it branches off from there, right?
Yeah.
So each that's very interesting, because I want to be and again, sorry for the listeners, but I say this every time, and I want to write a book. I do want to write a nonfiction book. I have a lot of ideas, a lot of opinions, but they're all just kind of all over the place. So I'm trying to find exactly what that is. It's on the horizon, but definitely I couldn't do anything fiction. I just don't have that muscle. But hearing you see how talk about how you start with one point and then organically, because I same kind of thing I'm wondering with Game of Thrones. I'm like, and even MCU stuff. I'm like, how did they just think of this just out of nowhere? And even obviously source the comic source material, but and the book source material, but from there it was just invented out of thin air. And I guess I'm not bred that way.
If you ask yourself the question, how cool would it be if that's basically writing right there?
Yeah, and I guess that's and with the show called What If, it's definitely being an avid marijuana enthusiast and psychonaut, I definitely can think of some very odd things in odd ways. So over 19 books, that's a lot. So how long have you been doing this? Since you were young, did you
Pretty much since birth. I started making up stories when I was about 5 or 6, and it just never got any better from there. It just got more and more involved, and I've been writing basically my entire life. I never managed to finish anything for a really long time. Like every writer, I started an awful lot of short stories, an awful lot of books, and they just sort of languish, and you get bored and you get interested in other projects, you move on. Until I read Stephen King's On Writing, which is chock full of good advice for writers. But the one thing that stuck with me is he said, finish everything. And I started thinking about that. And I realized that was the moment that I realized that writing is not so much an intellectual exercise as it is primarily a physical exercise. 90% of writing is actually writing, actually typing or scribbling down the words. And as it's a physical exercise, it is akin to running or jogging or basketball or any other physical exercise, in that you can develop those muscles. The more you type, the better you get at it. The more you plot, the better you get at it. It's a physical act of moving your hands. And I extrapolated from there, well, what happens if you start a story and then you don't finish it? What are you practicing? You're practicing not finishing a story. So I sat down and I took a year, and I didn't mean to take a year specifically, it just took a year. I sat down and started finishing everything that I had ever started. Terrible short stories, terrible poems, terrible songs, terrible books. I finished every single thing. And the more I got used to writing the end, the easier and easier it became. So when I started actually focusing on books, the ones that I've actually written that have been published are the ones that I did after this process, because there's a lot of bad stuff before that. But once I started practicing finishing, I never really had a problem after that figuring out what happened next, or getting writer's block, or trying to decide, well, what if this, what if that, what if the other? It just sort of happens now because I put so much practice into it. So writing 19 books sounds impressive, but it's a learnable skill. It is something that absolutely, I guarantee you, absolutely everybody can do. It just takes practice.
Right.
Nobody's an NBA superstar their first time on the court.
Right. And that's, I think, again, at my age, 31, kind of, I had some bad years where I wasn't really doing much. And well, I was doing stuff, but not very good. And which I think is common for millennials to kind of not grow up until 30. But the common theme that I've realized of following your dreams or doing what makes you happy in general, knowing that I would never fit in at a corporate 9 to 5, that all of the, all of, having a podcast is possible. You just have to do it. Writing a book is possible. You just have to do it. Getting in shape is possible. You just have to do it. I mean, that's a, I spent, I tend to over intellectualize things a lot. And I spent a lot of time in my late 20s when I was realizing that I was kind of just spinning my wheels, not really doing much, trying to learn from other people, whether it be, just other people in my life or successful people like on YouTube and their podcasts and stuff, reading some of their books, but not very many. And I think I was looking for a shortcut. I was looking for, the secret, no pun intended from that book. I was looking for the secret of how do I get myself to want to get up and do all of the things that are needed to achieve the end goal. And you look at, the people that you look up to who have put in the work and have paid their dues, and they are established, and then you see that and you want to be that. And what you don't see is all the time that they were putting in their dues, and it makes it seem like, well, if they can do it, I can do it, which is true, but it's an unfinished thought because it doesn't take into account what is, whatever it is that you're looking to do, there's work involved. And even if you're following your passion, it may be easier to be disciplined, but there's still a lot of work and stuff you don't want to do that you have to do.
Yes.
And that's a common theme that it's a tough pill to swallow. I mean, I without tooting my own horn, I as a kid, I was I picked things up in school very easily, so I didn't have to study a lot, and I would get good grades, and I went to college, and it was a little harder, but my grades didn't really improve. So I pretty much did the same thing and graduated. And it was at graduation where I was like, I just went through a lot of really important and useful lectures and all this stuff. Maybe I should have taken advantage of that. And now I spend most of my days just watching, people talk to me, lecturing me on YouTube. So I think it's part of the growing up process, especially for us millennials, where the internet has changed our entire view, and we're really the first generation that had it as kids. So it had a much bigger effect, and will continue to do so. But that idea of, oh, you can just do it because you see it online, like, well, life doesn't work that way. You've gotta put in your dues. And so I want to ask you a little bit more about that process and what that was like for you when after you took this finish everything to heart. Before that, I would imagine there's whether it's just writer's block or you get bored with the material or whatever. I imagine there's a myriad of reasons you would step away from something, but then coming back to decide that you are going to finish it. How do you get that in your mind to supersede the reason that you left that project in the first place?
Personally, I forced myself. I put word after word down, and I didn't really care for them. I wasn't interested in the story anymore. I thought the characters were flat, or the plot was trite, or I had ripped it off completely from a movie or TV show. But I finished it anyway. And the more little pieces I finished, the more I started to understand the structure of a story, how there is a beginning, a middle, and an end, and how you get from each of those things to the next thing. And the more you understand by doing, the better it is the next time.
Right.
Your first piece is going to be terrible. Your last piece is not going to be terrible. And two, it helps that approaching writing is one of the things you can learn by doing. It's a terrible way to learn brain surgery, but it's a great way to learn to write. Because it teaches you by mistake all of the things that do not work in a story. It teaches you to leave out extraneous details. It teaches you how to recognize an extraneous detail so that the next time you write a story, your first draft, which normally contains everything under the sun anyway, is a little more streamlined than the first draft of your previous project. Your first draft is literally for throwing everything in, but the more experience you have with writing, the more your brain will start to filter out things that really don't need to be there, that you'll just have to cut later, and it knows this. Human brains are among the single laziest creations ever. They're constantly looking for shortcuts. And I have noticed with me, once I have to edit a piece and I have to focus, I was really in love with adverbs at the beginning of when I started writing. And going back and editing and trying to get rid of as many as possible is tedious, and it is boring, and all of the other words that I'm not using an adverb for. So the next time I wrote, I was conscious, oh, that's an adverb, I'm going to cut it anyway, I just want to put it in. So each time and each book got faster and faster because my brain was filtering the stuff that I had learned from the previous draft or previous project or, previous everything, because that's what learning actually is. You apply the things you've seen to what you're doing next, and you get a little better at it, hopefully.
And so is Fire and Plans, is this your most recent one?
Yes.
Okay. And so just, what are rattle off some of your other titles. What's your favorite one? What's your least favorite one? What do you think is the most accessible? What do you think is the darkest?
That's a good question. I'd say that my urban fantasy trilogy is the darkest.
What's the name of that one?
That is the Veiled Earth trilogy.
The Veiled Earth.
Comprised of 3 books, Magician, Martyr, and Savior. I have a detective series that takes place in New York City in 1980, the Bennett DeMarco mysteries, which follow a pair of detectives through a series of truly epically terrible, terrible months. But that's 7 books and counting. And that would be my favorite series to write just because of the interplay of the 2 main characters. The male lead is a former police officer who retired because of medical reasons. And the female lead is a former hooker who retired because of main characters' reasons. And they make a wonderfully hysterical pair to write for. Even when it's serious and dark and everything looks dire, they are chemically just awesome to write for. It's very organic and it happens. It's just beautiful. I've done a lot of standalone science fiction. I've got another series that I'm working on, which is Steampunk Pirates. The first book of that is out. It's called Blue Sail. I started a trilogy about a motorcycle gang in Arizona in 1970. The first one of that is already out. That's dark. My least favorite is probably the book of short stories I wrote where I worked at horror and suspense.
Why is your least favorite?
Very least favorite because I think it's too easy. I'm not a huge... Horror is an easy genre to write for because there's so many things that scare people. All you really need is a creepy monster hiding under the bed, and you can make an entire book out of it. Stephen King's done it like half a dozen times. And don't get me wrong, I love Stephen King, but I think it's easier than crafting like a literary novel, or that's snobby. Not a literary novel.
I think I understand what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong. Not that you're saying that Stephen King is writing low-hanging fruit, but within any genre, there's going to be a range. And while he's obviously a highly respected author in that realm, but just in general, horror authors, I guess you're saying there's a lot there to work with.
Yes, I think. As you move further toward the spectrum of just straight people fiction, literary fiction or narrative fiction, whatever you want to call it, literary fiction is very snobby. Like I said, Stephen King does write low-hanging fruit, but he does it very well. And if you do it well enough,
absolutely.
I dislike writing in it because it doesn't make me work very hard. So while the stories are serviceable and the characters were okay, it just feels too easy from a writer standpoint. Yeah. So those are my least favorite. I enjoy them, but not nearly as much as I do my more character-driven stuff.
Gotcha. And so over the 19 books, how many different, you said you have a few standalone and then your collection of short stories, or maybe the better question is how many different series that span, whether it's a trilogy or it spans multiple books?
Let's see, the urban fantasy, the detective, steampunk, pirates, 4 with another one on the way, because I'm doing a crime fiction series about a female thief. So I will have 5 ongoing series, which is why
Wow.
the name change thing is so.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So my
Gotcha.
former person has become my alter ego and my nom de plume, because I'm not going to change in the middle of it.
No need for a pen name now.
Exactly.
So if I would love to ask about how much of yourself you put into your work, and I mean I guess any writer or anyone is you're of course writing from your own perspective, but more specifically your experiences. How closely or how much of your own personal experiences do you put into the books and these characters and things like that?
I think it's about 50-50. Sometimes I do it on purpose, and sometimes I don't discover what I've done until after it's been published and I read it and go, well, that's pretty telling. It is impossible to write without putting yourself into your characters.
Right.
I don't feel that you can actually portray something without injecting a little bit of yourself in it, whether it's a personality quirk or if it's a particular word you like to use. In my case, it's a belief in the fundamental goodness of love and humanity. That's a thread that runs through all my books to a greater or lesser extent, that there really is something better and something more pure. It tends to get lost along the way, during the battles or the gunfights or, the magical woo-woo. But I think that that's the one thing that I have purpose built into my books that comes directly from me.
I like that. That's good, because that's a obviously it's talking about how easy horror can be to just make something spooky, while love and that sentiment is so ubiquitous among people. I think capturing it in just articulating it is a much different thing. And so because it is so something so ubiquitous, something that we all do experience, not in the same way, but in a similar enough way that we can, that a love story is powerful, a good love story is powerful. I think the emotions and experiences of being in that situation are so intangible that when you are able to articulate a story and an experience of that happening, people want to sink their teeth right into it because they can relate, and they may have felt that exact thing, or if not that exact thing, they hear you say it and they're like, oh yeah, well I felt like that, but except this detail or whatever. And I think that is especially in the area of love and romance and stuff, that concept of being understood and being not feeling alone, not feeling that you're the only one experiencing things, is huge, because even though we all know that that's the name of the game in love, you love and you lose, and it happens to all of us, and whether it romantically or even in life, we lose people in just like she lost Kristoff, we lose people that we love, and in those times it can be so intense and simultaneously so unfamiliar that the ability to articulate that is something I think people really appreciate.
I think it's interesting to watch TV's shows and movies with people who go, oh, I never would have done that. But 99 times out of 100, people actually do that.
You mean the person watching saying, oh, I would never do what I just saw? Yeah.
Why don't they just tell each other how they feel?
Yeah.
You ever actually tried that in real life? terrible at expressing themselves. And when they can't get the point across, they get frustrated. And when they get frustrated, they get angry. And when they get angry, nothing comes out right, which is basically the plot of 2/3 of the shows that exist.
Right.
Is two people trying to communicate and not being able to find that one connection point. So I think it's gratifying to watch people that sometimes manage to make that connection, because you're like, oh yes, that's what I would like to have done in that situation. And it's also gratifying to see them mess it up, because that's exactly what I have done in that situation. I think it helps readers or watchers connect emotionally with those characters because they fundamentally feel they understand them.
Definitely. Right. So, I mean, we've been going for a little while now, but I did want to ask you specifically about the publishing process, as somebody who, I've been asking everybody this, as somebody who is looking to do this in the future. I'm curious about what your experience, once you have once you have your story, then what do you do with it? Who do you contact? How does all of that come together to where, you go to Barnes and Noble and your book is there, or you go to Amazon and your book is available?
Publishing has changed so much in the past 20 years that if you ask the same question tomorrow, you'll get almost a completely different answer. 20 years ago,
I keep asking it.
20 years ago, Kindle was not a thing. Amazon was not selling ebooks, and Barnes and Noble was the only place to get what you wanted to read, or an equivalent bookstore. And there were so many gatekeepers to getting to that point. It was very frustrating. The gatekeepers are, for the most part, dead. I don't want to say professionally, I have traditionally published fiction, especially short stories, and my books are independently published. And the reason I did it that way is because I tried for 5 years to get an agent or a publishing company to just email me back. I didn't care if it was a yes or no, just give me some contact. Right. I hit something.
Yeah.
But when I finally decided, you know what, I may die before these books ever come out. I want to get them out into the world. I decided to self-publish. From the day I decided to self-publish to actually having a bound copy of my work in my hands took me about 3 months.
Oh, that's actually pretty quick.
Yes.
That seems, usually you hear about, taking years, especially with Mr. George R. R. Martin. But obviously that's more about the writing itself. And so what is, when you're trying to reach out to an agent and get into, I guess we can call it legacy publishing, if that's an appropriate term. How do you then decide, okay, I'm gonna change gears, and what does that look like? Is there a website? Did you go on Reddit and kind of get more? I mean, what did you do?
I did a lot of research. I did a lot of reading. I found a lot of Facebook groups. I found a lot of Reddit groups where people were doing similar things. I started publishing in 2015. This is the other reason I publish independently. My first book came out in 2015. It's 6 years later and I've published 19 books. If I had been picked up by a traditional publisher, and this is actually going back to Stephen King, this is why he started using a pseudonym in the late 80s, where he started publishing under the Richard Bachman name. They didn't want to put out more than 2 books of his a year. Even him, at the height of his success, his publisher didn't want to put out more than 2 books a year.
No, you want to stretch that.
He obviously has way more to say than that, and so did I. So if I had even gotten picked up by a traditional publisher, I would have had to wait a minimum of 18 months for my first book to even come out, because the production schedule is so tight. Whereas independently publishing, I can put it out tomorrow.
So production scheduling mean on their end dealing with all of their clients and being in line for this, and this person's bigger, so they pay for all that kind of stuff.
Not only that, but just the logistics of it. If a medium-sized publishing house has 50 authors or 100 authors and they're all putting out books, you've got a book coming out like every week or every month. Just getting into that schedule, just getting put at the end of that line, you've got all those books before you even get there, and that's after it's publishable.
So is that how is that standard practice where a publishing company will only put out a book or a certain number of books, among all their authors over a certain period of time?
I think so. They
And
used to be afraid of oversaturation.
yeah, I think,
And then,
because I mean, I definitely, obviously, it makes sense why, especially with a Stephen King, why A, you wouldn't want to oversaturate the market, and B, why you would want to stretch that out as long as possible.
yeah,
But for the very reasons you're talking about, and I guess maybe it is that same oversaturation. But I would assume if you've got 50 authors, then that allows you to put out more releases without the saturation because of the fact that they're different authors.
you would think that.
I would
Unfortunately,
think
with traditional publishing, you also have to take into account things that have nothing to do with the author, like how much a print run costs, how much ink costs, how long it actually takes to print the physical copies and ship them, how much the shipping costs are. Traditional houses are sort of bound by the physical limitations of their real world.
Mhm.
Whereas when you start publishing online, I publish a copy of a book and it's infinite downloads electronically for the rest of its life.
Right.
And with print on demand, I don't have warehouses full of books waiting around, hoping they get sold. That's where most of your remaindered books and bargain books come from, is unsold stuff that gets sold to secondhand houses or Barnes and Noble, where they slap a $2 sticker on it and try to get rid of it that way. I get an order for a book, it prints, and it gets shipped out. That's one book that goes out. The other thing,
go ahead. Sorry.
The other thing about traditional printing and publishing versus independent publishing is your price cut. If you sell a book for $20 through a traditional publisher, the author is lucky to get $5. That's a really good contract. I sell a book for $7.99. I get $6 out of it.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And this is very analogous to, I think, the way that music has evolved over a similar time period, where it was all about the record companies, and you get a crappy deal and all this and that, and then which started with like the MySpace Pure Volume and SoundCloud days, where you could just put out anything. And now, of course, Spotify has become the big name in the area, but streams are now predominantly how people listen to music, and musicians, how they make a significant amount of money. Of course, there's touring and merch and all that stuff, but from the music itself, people aren't buying physical CDs anymore. It's very similar. So I think, again, thinking back to my own desires of writing a book, which I wanted to do for a long time. I think when I first started having these ideas, whether we were or were not in this current landscape where independent publishing is possible, I definitely wasn't thinking of it like that. I just assumed you write a book, you got to get a book deal, and so on and so on and so forth. And so what? Again, so let's say I have a book. I'm done with my book. I like how it is. When you're publishing independently, are you like contracting someone for the cover and like all the different pieces, or are we at the place kind of like where Spotify is, where there's and like for podcasts there's Anchor, where it's independent and you're doing it all yourself, but there's some sort of infrastructure in place. Like this is a brand new podcast, but once I have all the RSS feed and everything set up, you can search for it in Apple, you can search for it on Spotify, all of those things. So is the independent book publishing industry sort of like that in the same way, or is it very much a one-man show?
There are so many different ways to do it. It could be however you want it to be. When I first published my first couple of books, I was doing the covers badly in Photoshop. I was doing the typesetting not awesomely, and I was publishing them myself, and they were amateur. Now that I have more experience, I know that I need a cover, I need an editor, I need someone who's going to typeset for me. And I have managed to find all those things on a very reasonable budget. So it's, if you want to edit yourself, that's the only thing. I swear to you, if you do nothing else, find a good editor. You cannot edit yourself. I'm trained to edit, and I know that I can't edit myself. So I do my best, and then I send it off to my editor, who immediately finds like 8 million typos.
So if I can stop you right there, because I mentioned in one of my older episodes that going back to like middle school, when we would do creative writing type things in English class and stuff, the writing process is your first draft, and then you revise, and then you edit, and then all that stuff. And it just seemed, maybe it was, again, not to toot my own horn, but I was a little bit above average. And so maybe because definitely by the time I was in college, I was doing a lot more editing and revising of my work, of course. But I still had the mentality from when I was younger that this editing and revising thing is just kind of give it a once over, but you say what you want to say. And especially now that I have my old podcast, which isn't alive anymore. You can still find it if you search All Really Podcast. But this as well, obviously I haven't done any prep work for this besides I read the cover once this morning, and then I read the cover on camera, and then I brought you on. So what exactly about editing or an editor is so crucial?
The easiest way to explain it is to pick a word, any word.
Basketball.
Say that word out loud 50 times, and then tell me if it sounds the same at the end as it did at the beginning. Repetition creates blind spots. I have a tendency to use really a lot, and I don't even see it. When I'm reading, it's like a blank spot in the text. There are a lot of tricks you can use, the easiest of which, of course, is to do a search in whatever Word document or word processing program you're using to see how many times did I use really. It turns out it's really a lot. There are a lot of little tricks you can use, but ultimately having a second set of eyes that doesn't already know the story like you do. Like if I go to edit, I know what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And I can see the intention behind my words, but that intention may not actually come out. I may just be remembering what I was trying to say when I wrote it. And you sort of de facto see that in your work. My editor and I, most of our conversations are, you didn't get that? No, I got this. But I was going for this. Yo, you got nowhere near that.
So that is, I definitely absolutely see the merit in that. And I guess the heart of my question is obviously, a good editor is obviously going to be better at it, but my thinking is that if my audience is not for editors, but for just regular people, then why wouldn't I be able to give a copy to my mom, give a copy to my friend, give a copy to my sister, and take some notes from them? Obviously, again, the fact that the editor this is what he does, but it seems like a difference in degree rather than a difference in kind. Whereas I would imagine, because editing is such a big part of the writing process, and editors work very well, that I'm wrong about that. But I'm wondering if you can close that gap for me.
There are a lot of things that editors know to look for that your average person doesn't. Your average untrained in editing person.
Right.
It depends on how much that person reads. It depends on the diversity of what they read. It also depends on whether or not they've studied structure, whether they've studied language, whether they understand tone, pacing, or even just general consistency of a character throughout the book. My editor will flag a lot of tiny little details about my certain characters and go, yeah, but back here, they said this. It just doesn't feel like this is a word they would use. Or editors do more than, oh, that's a typo. That's a typo.
Mm.
There are a lot of different types of editing, and a good editor usually focuses on one. There's generalized proofreading, which is a type of editing, but it's not primarily what a lot of editors do. Developmental editors will tell you where your plot is simplistic or show you gaping plot holes. You'll have editors who will focus entirely on tone or theme, or it's more complicated than, oh, that was a good story. It's like, yes, that was a good story, but you said it in 1970.
Okay,
this
thanks.
guy said, a slang word that wasn't invented until 1985. It's things like that most readers don't actually see the mechanics behind and underneath the writing that make it good. Because if you're reading, and I'm sure you've done this, you're reading a book and all of a sudden you hit a word that just feels wrong, it'll pull you out of the story a little bit. And if you hit enough of those, you get annoyed. And if you get annoyed, you'll stop reading or you'll stop connecting. So it's very important not to push the reader outside of that bubble of believability.
So when you say that, I just to bring it back, I'm curious how, because when you say that, the first thing that comes to mind is This Is Us, because it's a great story. It's all, all the things we talked about before, but it's the actual words that turn me off. And because like I have a friend who she loves the show, and at first, in my room we would tease her like, oh, this show sucked, but she loves it. So she, like, all right, we don't want to be mean, we were just playing around, but if you really love the show and you're getting upset that we're making fun of this, and like, not just like, it sucks, but like we would point out like, well, if he was going to do this, then why would that? And of course he's going to say this because I knew he was going to say this, and whatever. I guess I don't know exactly what my question is, but I'm connecting those two things, and I would love if This Is Us had a better editor. I guess that's the point.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to argue about it because my first instinct is, what? I will fight you for it. The best way I can put it is this. You've got a scene with two 17th century knights on horseback. And the first knight looks at his companion and says, yonder is the castle of our enemy. And the second knight goes, bitchin'. It pulls you right out of the story.
Right.
Unless it's actually a comedy, it doesn't work. And that's one of the things that editors do. They point out things that just do not flow properly in your story. I'm okay at it. I'm good at it. I've got a master's in English and creative writing. I've edited a lot, and I edit for other people semi-professionally, but I wouldn't put my books out anymore without going through another editor first, just because they catch a lot of the things that I don't. I will, personally speaking, I will hyper focus on a word. So you get this scenario where I use a word like way too much. And it might be a regular word that you run into, or it might be something odd like ubiquitous. All of a sudden, there will be 50 more ubiquitouses in my text.
I use that all the time.
Exactly.
I think I've said it 3 times on this podcast.
Exactly, which is why I picked it. But you tend not to see that. It's in a very similar way. It's like dialogue tags. The most commonly used dialogue tag is said. And the reason it's the most commonly used is because said is like the beige of the English language.
Right.
When you're reading, they said, okay, your brain skips it, But if like you're going along, they ejaculated, they shouted, the more oddly your dialogue tags stand out, the worse it looks, which is why said is used almost all of the time.
Ah, okay.
You don't want, especially when you're going through dialogue, you've got 2 or 3 characters that are speaking together, a said here and there, you're not going to see it. Right. But if you've got shouted, whimpered, if you've got all these really exciting dialogue tags, it starts to become painfully obvious. They stand out. And that's one thing an editor will help you with. They will point out the parts of your story that stand out and make it even. And that consistency is one of the things that people edit for, which is not something you see as a writer of your own work.
Definitely. So I guess because you said a good editor and not just having an editor. And so with your own work, you say you do semi-professional editing. Is that what would be negative, or what with all everything being equal, assuming that you would have an editor that would you would put on the same level as yourself in editing. It's still what they do, and it's still a fresh set of eyes. So why? Because again, I'm again, I might be just hyper focusing on the way you said it, but you said having a good editor and not just making sure you have an editor.
What defines a good editor is, like everything else, kind of a multi-tiered question. How good are they at grammar? That's important, but not super important. How good are they at finding spelling errors? It's important, but not super important. How good are they at working with a writer and finding a way to come together? That's super important. A good editor knows how to work with a writer to get the best story out that they can, to take their vision to the absolute pinnacle of what they see for it. Because when you're writing, so much of what you want to say is implied. You're going for a certain tone, or you're going for a certain emotional impact. And although I can feel it very, very keenly when I'm typing, it may not come through when I'm writing. So I go back and I read it and I feel the same emotion that I felt when I wrote it. It may still not be there. So your editor is also a good way to get a feel for how well you did your job. Their job is to make your job look easy, which it isn't.
So and again, just trying to put it in terms in a frame of reference that I understand. I was in lots of bands as a kid, which is why I talked about the music stuff. And so using my original question about the difference between a good editor and just an editor versus giving it to your friends who would be an average reader. It seems like the giving it to just a regular reader is different kind of you're going to get a different kind of result from going to an editor. But as long as you have an editor, the better the editor is, I guess it would be almost limitless as to how much more that person could help you have your vision come out the way that you want it. Is that fair to say?
To throw it back at you, using an analogy I think you'll get, it's the difference between Bob Rock and Jimmy Iovine producing.
Yeah, I think yeah. And we're saying the same kind of thing, that yeah, basically just that, there's levels to anything. And again, talking about the grammar and the spelling, if you're an editor by profession, you're probably good enough to catch any mistakes like that. But on the developmental side and the collaborative side, I could imagine somebody, an editor who is very good at developing a story, but they don't necessarily work well with the writer. So the story they're developing departs from the original vision. And maybe vice versa, that the editor gets that vision completely, but is not much better at you than developing your own work.
There are countless examples that I could give you of editors who thought they were writers. If I remember correctly, Raymond Chandler, one of the premier writers of noir, basically developed it. His editor took control of a lot of his writing. I may be misremembering that, but there is a debate whether this author's work was their work, if it should be credited to them and the editor. The problem is the editor changed a lot of stuff without telling them and then released it, so there wasn't much they could do after the fact. It is really important for an editor to understand that the vision of the book is not their vision. Their job is to make the writer's vision as sharp and as prevalent as they possibly can. And any editor who says, I don't think you should do that, I think you should go in this direction, you've got to be very careful. They're either trying to help you or they're trying to write fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get so many emails from editors.
But at least interesting. So yeah, that's definitely got a lot of seeing the parallels between making music and writing a book, and I guess really any form of art is it has the same type of beats. And living in this age, it's getting easier and easier. Not to say that it's easy, but it is getting easier and easier. The barriers to entry are getting lower and lower, and people are able to get their stories out there. And they're not all going to be great, but the more voices we have, the more the better. The more art we have, the better. That's really really cool.
Yeah. There is countless outlets. There are countless niches, and I guarantee you, if you write something, somebody out there will enjoy it. There is such a huge audience for everything. It's so much bigger than the publishing houses ever thought. That we have to release these 6 types of genres or they're not going to sell. There's people out there clamoring for everything. It is truly humbling to realize that not only are you not a drop in the bucket is way bigger than you thought.
Right.
But it's also cool because as an independent writer, you get to connect with your readers a lot more closely. The reason I have the editor that I do is because she read one of my early books and commented on Amazon. And I was really intrigued by that. And I wanted to ask her a question. So I emailed her and said, hey, did this female character feel, and we started a dialogue like that. And then it turned out she was an editor and she became my editor, which was really cool.
Yeah.
But it was just me answering a comment on Amazon that led me to an entirely different way to write.
And I love that organically developing type stuff. I think that's awesome because you could go to findmeaneditor.com and luck out, but it's often those situations that happen organically where even if I'm not saying that's the case, obviously I don't know your editor, but I'm just saying even if maybe she wasn't the best at the developmental part, if you guys are on the same wavelength, again, it can help. It can help move the process along.
Yeah, she has become invaluable to my process, and in fact, early on in this book, there was a different draft where she got like 25 pages into it. She emailed me immediately. She's like, "No, this is creepy. You cannot use it." And on reflection, I'm like, "Yeah, okay,
yeah, you're right." Interesting, very interesting.
So I think it's good. Beta readers are important. It is important to get your stuff out there to as many people as possible, but I will generalize by saying, don't give your work to your family. They're not going to be able to look at you and go, this is really terrible. And here's why. Right. Mm-hmm. They may say, this is really terrible, or it wasn't my thing. They won't be able to explain why. Times out of 10. What you need is someone who will read and go, it didn't work for me because this.
Right. Exactly. Gotcha.
I mean, I'm speaking only from theory because I have yet to get my family to read any of my stuff before we're done. So there's that. But in general, I don't think that close friends and family are the best beta readers. Right. I think they're good for emotional reaction, but what you're going to get are more vagaries like, oh yeah, I liked it, or oh, I didn't like it, or hey, it was okay. That tells you almost nothing.
Right. And so you would probably want to save the. So if someone like a friend was asking, and you say, I just finished the first draft, and a friend was like, oh, can I see it? You would probably be like, well, let me, I'll give you a later version. Is that?
Yes. Gotcha. I also, nobody sees my first drafts. Nobody sees my first. The author Neil Gaiman, Neverwhere, and basically everything he's ever done, Good Omens, stuff like that. One of the coolest things I've ever seen was he was talking about writing, and he said, your second draft exists to make it look like you knew what you were doing in your first.
I love that.
Exactly. Yeah. I consider it to be like carving an elephant out of marble. You start with a huge chunk, and that's your first draft. And then as you start to carve away the large bulk of it, you get your second draft, and then you start to sand off the edges and get a more refined shape. That's your third draft. And you just keep narrowing and narrowing and narrowing it down until you get an actual elephant. That's what writing is. Writing is rewriting. It's always going to be rewriting because you can always do it a little bit better.
So how do you decide when you're done?
That's a good question. The poet Paul Valery once said that no poem is ever truly finished. It's only abandoned. And I think that that holds true with a lot of art. I think I go back and read some of my stuff and I'm like, oh my God, I wish I could change that. Yeah. But at some point you have to say, right now at the limit of my skill, this is the best I can do. It's time to release it into the wild.
And I guess there's a sentiment of, you know, overcooking it as well, and you know, losing, you know, getting lost in the sauce and trying to make it too perfect, and then you know, maybe it doesn't have that personality of you specifically. And again, you know, especially, I mean, that's a big, again, part of the show is that there's so many books out there, and it's really hard to see why any, you know, there's a million stories about love out there. But, you know, if someone can see this and see you and have a better understanding of who you are, then that gives the book a little bit more context, and that gives the story itself you know, a paradigm. You know, you can look at it from a certain perspective that you would only be able to guess unless you did know the author. So that's really cool. And I definitely think that for you has definitely shown through, because again, while it sounds like an intriguing story, it is the back of the book is pretty simple. And, you know, of course it has to be. You can't get into the whole story on the back of the book, but it's really nice to be able to let that idea breathe a little bit, and not just that idea, but again, seeing what is behind it, who's behind that idea. And that gives you a little bit better of idea of, if I wanted to read a love story, well, here's, you know, this is a good place to start because I have more reason to.
I hope it's good. I think it's good. I enjoyed writing it. I enjoyed the process of it. I loved the characters. And you start to get a feel after a while when you do it, whether you've like hit something really electric or if it falls flat. Elmore Leonard, the crime fiction writer, had sadly a list of 10 rules that he had for writing. And number 10 was one that I follow exclusively. If it sounds like writing, rewrite it.
If it sounds like writing, rewrite it.
Yep. You want it to flow naturally. You want it to be organic. You want it to be very much a culmination of all of the things that came before it. But the last thing you want is for the reader to go, oh, I bet this writer has read a dictionary at some point because that was a really obscure word. Mm. If it sounds like you constructed it, if it sounds like you built it, if it sounds like you're trying to show off, you probably should rewrite it.
It's like the high school essay where you forgot to do the 500-word essay. You're just like, you know, going back to all the adverbs, and he exquisitely and expertly and all of that.
That's exactly what it is.
And as kids doing that, you're like, oh, I've got this. I'm using all these different words and I'm sounding fancy. And then of course the teacher reads it and it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
You just end up sounding like an overeducated tool.
Or depending on how badly you are, an undereducated tool. So I guess again, the underlying message that I'm getting from you in that I get from a lot of people in simply achieving what you set out to achieve is coming down to just being authentic with yourself. I think. What is it that you want to do? What is required in order to do that? You know, which is going to include stuff that you don't want to do, and accept that you're going to have the discipline to do this, that, and the other, and achieve things. And that's what you got to do. There's no other shortcut. It's
interesting that you put it that way, because there's actually a line in the book that one of the characters says to the other when trying to explain why you do art. It boils down to a question. What does my soul most want to say to another soul? That's the essence of it. Be who you are and explode it all over the page, and you will make connections.
Yeah, and I think that to piggyback on that, the doing that and having that be received and feeling understood, I think is one of the pinnacles of non-drug related experiences. Just feeling that connection with people, especially if you don't know them and they're not experiencing the same experiences as you, but they have the same feelings and they have the same outlooks. And you realize that as different as we all are, there's so much that we have in common, and there is a way to, get through this life without just getting through it, but enjoying it. And that definitely for me that wasn't always the case. And I've definitely gotten better at learning how to embrace that. And not that life has to be sunshine and rainbows all the time, but it is what it is, and you can make the best of it.
I heartily and heartfeltly agree with that.
Well, I mean, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you for so much for coming, and you've given me a lot to think about in terms of my own writing and my own work. And I definitely think you have explained this this one book as well as your work in general as something that is not necessarily so unique and obscure, but that is again authentic, and that if someone is to read this or any of your works, that they will I believe feel the same person I'm talking to now behind that book.
I would hope so. I would very much hope so. Readers may not connect with every character they encounter, not just in this book, but in any book. But if a character is done well enough, there is going to be something about that character that you will connect with. Because there are more similarities between people than there are dissimilarities, I think.
Absolutely. Well, I would, anytime you've got something new coming out, I would love to have you on again. There is definitely, some other stuff outside of the book realm that I think we could have really interesting conversations about if you wanted to go down that road too. But for now, I'm very excited about this book, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want to shout out your socials, websites, books, anything else, anything that you, where people can find you?
You can find all of my stuff on Amazon. All you got to do is search for my name, Aaron S Gallagher, and it'll pop up.
Social media?
Have social media, but like most writers, I only have so many hours in the day. So I can either tweet or I can write. I can post on Facebook or I can write. I can post on my website or I can write. And ultimately writing is what I choose to do 90% of the time. But my last 7 or 8 books have also been published through an independent publishing house, Indies United, which you can search for and find not just my books, but a whole collective of indie authors whose work is there.
Oh, Indies United?
Indies United.
Yeah, and we'll have all these links and stuff linked below or wherever you're listening to this. And you can, as always, find me on my socials. But Aaron, thank you so much for coming. This was a great conversation. I didn't know what to expect, and I was pleasantly surprised. And like I said, I would be happy to have you back anytime.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Have a good one. All right, so that was Aaron S Gallagher and her book, So Much Fire, So Many Plans, along with apparently 18 other books, which is a lot. Well, I mean, it seems like a lot, but I guess that concept of writing a lot of books, like that would be, you have your Stephen Kings or your Tom Clancy's and people who have these long catalogs of books. but when she was talking about the legacy publishing industry and how they would only want to release books on a certain schedule, keep oversaturation, to prevent oversaturation, stretch out, if Stephen King's got 100 books and you release them as soon as he's done, then in a few years you're going to have just a bunch of different Stephen King books on the shelves. Whereas if you release once every 10 months, then that's the one. And even if it's been written 10 years ago, even it might need a little update or something, but you've got you've got all that ready to go. What else? The one thing she said that really I think was on the nose was, I've been asking everybody, and I'm going to continue to ask. So if you hate that question, sorry. About the difference between me being into fiction writing and fiction on TV and in movies, and the visual aspect, because it cuts down the what can be fluff from a lower quality writer, I would say, which would be good, just good world building from a good author. If you're not that good at it, then it can get very boring. Whereas if a movie, the acting is kind of off, you still get, you're still moving at the same pace, and even if the beats didn't hit, then you're still with it. And I mean, definitely, it's my attention span just doesn't. I just don't have a very long attention span, and I could sit here and talk to people for hours, but if I'm just sitting with a book, I need, I at least need music playing or something, and I don't get a lot out of it. But yeah, understanding that really, gives credence in my mind to what I've been saying about the literary value of some of the higher end cinematic things out there. Your Breaking Bad, your Game of Thrones, your MCU, that kind of stuff, and many others. I use those because those are the big ones, and they're at the top of their game for different reasons. But I'm not saying that it's just those three, and then everything else sucks. Just use those as an example. What else? I mean, I think the concept of writer's block is something that has always bugged me and always worried me. And even in podcasting, that's why this episode was recorded on September 5th, because I'm not fully confident in myself to make sure that I'll have enough, I can get a constant stream of new guests, and then just my own motivation, that just like, do I want to do it? I want to be able to have some in the in the archive, that if I don't feel like doing it or I can't find a guest this week, I can put that one up. But I'm very I'm really liking this. I didn't know how this would turn out when I started. I felt like it was a pretty good idea. And as I was mentioning to Aaron, the nonfiction books tend to lend themselves to this type of conversation where you and I haven't read the books. So, the details about the characters and the plot points, we don't have them. That's the whole point. And if it's a nonfiction book, then we can talk about those concepts because they're something that exists outside of that book. And that book is just about what already exists. But again, just like Aaron and Bob and John before him and all my other fiction guests, if you are writing in such a way that, that we're talking about this authentic way, and you're just expressing yourself, then the story is going to be more than the story. The story is going to be more than just the words on the paper, more than just what happens to this character, and especially to you as the writer. And so you should be able to, at least in your own head, be able to know enough about your work to have this conversation. Now, whether you can articulate that for real, and whether you're a broadcaster is not necessarily the same thing. I completely understand that if you may have all of these ideas in your head as a fiction writer, but this wouldn't be the best platform for you to come on and talk about them because that's not your thing. That I completely understand. And I don't want to dissuade fiction writers from especially listening, but also wanting to engage and participate in this project, because I do think that it is hopefully, I mean, I guess you guys will have to tell me, it does seem to be doing what I intended it to do. And that cover is a very, again, it's an aesthetically pleasing cover, but it doesn't necessarily pop out in terms of love story. And even if I was a painter and I had lost my husband, well, maybe if it's both those things, but let's just say I was an artist and I was looking for a love story. I don't know that just looking at that cover and reading the back of that book that I would necessarily be like, oh, okay, yeah, this one. But after talking to her, it's there's much more to it. And even if I'm not claiming that, oh, now I know that So Much Fire, So Many Plans is the best love story ever written, and I don't think that Aaron would claim that either. But you don't have to be the best ever to be great even, and there's just a lot out there. So this is definitely for more than me. It's for you guys to have somewhere to start. In terms of, if you're going to read something, there's always people throwing books at you. There's always people, have you read this? Have you read that? Have you read that? Have you read that? And if you're anything like me, then you just don't know where to start. And I've already got a routine of, all the YouTube channels that I follow, all the podcasts that takes up all of my time, and I'm already listening to it at 2 times the speed. So I just don't even have the desire that much to cut down on that to consume the material that's in the books. I want to use Audible more often and listen to more audiobooks, because I think that is better than just listening to the breakdown of the UFC fights. Not that I'm going to not watch that, but there is just too much information out there to not be taking advantage of it. It's out there. And too many people are, just because they can be entertained, then they stop there. And I think entertainment can be more than just that. I think you can be entertained by things that also have a much higher value. And reading is probably the quintessential thing that would fit that category. So again, that is So Much Fire, So Many Plans by Aaron S Gallagher. Definitely go check out her work. Don't be confused by the fact that she has long hair. I do too. Maybe one day I would love to have her back, and maybe one day we would be able to have that conversation, because I am very interested, and I wanted to point it out just in the beginning, so it wasn't an elephant in the room, but that's not why she was here. But I don't personally know a lot of trans people, and it's such a hot political issue that all I know is third party, fourth party, accounts of what is going on for the most part. And while I understand, of course, that, like, people are people, I want to talk about that actual aspect of these people. And especially for me, who can for me, who can come across as a little bit abrasive sometimes, and this being such a sensitive subject, it's something that it needs the right time and the right place. And Aaron seems like she would be down, but if not, that's here nor there. But it is something I would like to get into. So maybe if you want her back to talk about that stuff, let us know in the comments, and I'll do that. And if you don't care, then let me know that too. Thank you once again for tuning into the I Didn't Read Your Book podcast. I am your host, Lutch. That is Morty in the back there. We were talking with Aaron S Gallagher about So Much Fire, So Many Plans. Please give it a like, comment something, whether it's good or bad. Give me a subscribe, all of that good stuff. I really need to get this off the ground, and the bigger the bigger the channel gets, the bigger stature of author I can get. Not that anything against any of the authors we had so far or are having in the future, but of course I want them clicks, baby. So if I can get some famous authors on here, that's the name of the game. So engagement is key. Share this with somebody who would want to see what this conversation will be. I don't know. I didn't know where I was going with that. But thank you for another episode. I will be back next week, according to my plans of release scheduling. Again, it's only September 5th now. I have no idea when this is coming out, but assuming all is well, I will see you next week, and have a good one.